Wow. Okay. I just went through an entire introduction on mute, and I apologize. So back to it while we wait for people to get here. I start all of this off with the introduction to CASA. And if you're new here, go check us out online. CASAA.org. That's the Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives Association. Lots of information about vaping, tobacco harm reduction, snus, nicotine pouches, all the wonderful things that we use to stay smoke-free. And of course, opportunities to get engaged on policy issues, state and local legislation. And right now we have a comment engagement up for the proposed ban on menthol and the proposed ban on flavored cigars. Remember, that's two different rules. So we've basically left you a big blank page to go and express your opinion on that. Definitely take the opportunity to encourage FDA to authorize more smoke-free products in flavors other than tobacco that people are using to quit smoking cigarettes. So with that, welcome to our Twitter space. We do this every 2 weeks. Just a quick programming note for all of the CASA media platforms. We're taking the weekend off. It's a holiday weekend. Everybody go enjoy the springtime weather and your friends and family. And of course, observance of it's Memorial Day, right? Getting right into it, I'm honored and privileged to introduce our guests tonight. We have Marc Slis back. I believe this is a third time that Marc has been with us. So welcome back, Marc. And Marc is, of course, a vape shop owner in Michigan, an outspoken advocate in favor of, in support of tobacco harm reduction, and all the wonderful work that he does in his community to help people quit smoking and switch to safer alternatives. We're also joined by Annie Kleykamp. I think I got that pronounced correctly. Annie is an author and scientist, an experimental psychologist, and with a focus on substance use and drugs. Current position, working at the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Also in the past, you've been worked for Penny Associates, who I've had the privilege of rubbing elbows with you and Joe Gitchell and Robin Gougelet and some other folks at Penny. Very much appreciate their work. And also an author on Filter. You've written several articles for Filter and encourage everybody to go check those out. So without further ado, welcome to our Twitter Spaces, guys. And the topic of discussion here is the e-cigarette summit, which happened last week. And I guess, or was it? Yeah, it was last week. I'd like to start with Annie. I know that your time is short tonight, but you were in the audience, and I'm sort of curious, did you have any big takeaways or revelations, or were there any really interesting side conversations that you had at the conference that might be worth noting?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, and hello to everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is my first time doing one of these. But yeah, so just to give everybody a little perspective on how I went into the e-cig summit, the last one I went to was in 2018. That's when I was at Penny Associates as a scientist. I left Penny that year because I was getting a lot of pushback due to the affiliation. At that time, we were working with Reynolds on tobacco harm reduction. So the affiliation with Big Tobacco, and I wrote a critique of the Surgeon General's report that I got a response from Brian King and others on it that basically made me realize if I kept my affiliation, I wouldn't be able to publish. So fast forward 4 years. I've done a lot of other things than tobacco harm reduction in the meantime, but stuck with it and been writing for Filter. And so going this year, I will say it was different. Like I tried to put myself in 2018 and then in current year for eCig Summit. And one thing I noticed just personally, it felt like people were talking more, including scientists that are notoriously in the tobacco control area. I mean, respected Benowitz and such, but talking about e-cigarettes as cessation tools, which is weird, right? That we haven't been for many years. But I feel like in 2018, in tobacco control circles in the US, that was really not allowed. And I I appreciated that this time around, although everything felt still cautious, even at the e-cig summit, which is often more open to this. And I was disappointed that honestly I hadn't seen more evolve since 2018 in terms of science and just how we were talking about it. And Ray and I gave a presentation, which I thought was great, on just the evidence and how it is presented in the published literature. It really, there's so much bias, there's so much spin that it's really hard to take anything from it. And I think that's stunning a lot of what we're hoping to do with THR.
Yeah, on that point about the sort of move towards talking about cessation, do you see that as a positive, or is it perhaps? I feel like there's a pitfall there where we get sort of corralled into only being a cessation product.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a pitfall, and the idea of only looking at it as something that should be FDA approved on the cedar side, like a treatment, which huge problem and decreases access. I would say from my perspective, and I know not everybody knows this, but like I came up through the ranks of quote unquote tobacco control in the sense I was doing nicotine laboratory based research with humans in like the early 2000s, so 2001 to 2007, so right before Hanlick and everything came over. So I was studying the patch, and which, as we all know, is a cessation tool. And I feel like the people I worked with and know that often a lot of them that I trained with are prohibition focused. The ability for anyone to acknowledge these devices as potentially helping people is huge, which I know that's not helpful to us in our work, but I guess it's sad and good, because why is it so hard for people to admit in US tobacco control that these can help people shift away from smoking? But I do hear you, and I feel like maybe sort of with our training in the US on nicotine being only some sort of treatment and not a consumer product that is healthy and fun, it's like the only way to see the benefit is to somehow frame them as only a medication. And so I hear you on that, Alex.
Yeah, and maybe expanding it out a little bit, and this is also a question for Marc. I think we're trying to make him a speaker here, but because he was on the panel at the end, the question that David Ashley posed to the panelist was, where do you see the marketplace in 5 years? And so I'm curious, specifically with your focus on substance use, and acknowledging how we're seeing cannabis being legalized and regulated, and a movement towards at least decriminalizing and perhaps regulating a marketplace for all other drugs. Do you see nicotine being preserved in that, or more broadly, I think that conversation that we're having about drugs regulation, for lack of a better term, recreational drugs regulation, having some benefits for regulating the nicotine marketplace.
Yeah, I would hope that we could all view recreational drugs similarly. And if we're deregulating psychedelics and we're thinking about cannabis differently, I do have concerns that that's not happening. So for example, when I was at Hopkins for my postdoc, I would assist on the psychedelic trials. We had guided sessions, and I was just like a volunteer because I found it fascinating that we were looking at this drug that had basically been abolished or, sidelined into regulatory isolation. And now it could be a tool and a positive. And I talked to people around that were in that research, are actively in it, are actively watching, the landscape around psychedelics shift. And there's just this whole different view. And I feel, it's depressing sometimes, because it's like, because nicotine and tobacco has this affiliation with industry at some point, it's like holding people back from seeing it in the same light as something like a psychedelic, where it's not black or white, and prohibiting it is not a good thing. Like all these things we're seeing evolve with views of these drugs that have been prohibited. I really don't see people in the US actively embracing it. And when I say people, I'm thinking from the perspective right now as like academic researchers, right? So those aren't really the people that I might need to talk about, but they're the people that I've studied with and then I'm talking to at conferences. And it's frustrating that they can't view alongside psychedelics and cannabis, tobacco and tobacco harm reduction similarly.
Yeah, you brought up a good point or distinction there between the people and the academics, and I want to bring Marc in now that we got the microphone working. Marc, sort of the same question for you, but since you were on the panel, the same question to start things off. Any important takeaways or revelations you might have had from the conference? I am sort of curious, for those who haven't watched the panel that you were on, there were some. At least I perceived some kind of tense moments between you and FDA, and then also you got a bit of a response from Kathleen Hoke. It seemed like she followed your presentation. So just kind of curious, the same question that I posed to Annie. Were there any big revelations or takeaways from the conference, and did you have any meaningful side conversations?
Yeah. So my big takeaways are probably due to the fact this is the first time I've ever been to anything like this. So everything was new to me. The things that I saw, I think the conference is absolutely amazing because of the side conversations, the sharing of ideas and concepts that I saw going on around me and as well got to participate in. I thought that was absolutely amazing. On top of amazing speakers and that kind of thing, but just the idea sharing was amazing. That's really my big takeaway.
So was there anything in particular maybe that I am doing just a little bit of fishing here. Did you have an opportunity to speak with Matt Holman afterwards or Kathleen Hoke or I'm forgetting her name, Miss Crosby?
Oh yeah, I think she's also Kathleen.
Okay.
I believe. No, I really wanted to speak to Matt Holman for a couple of reasons. And I was not able to track him down following the discussion panel. In fact, somebody told me he left. I don't know if that's true, but I never saw him again.
Well, I think government employees turn into pumpkins at 4:00, so they got to get somewhere safe by then.
Well, he wasn't terribly happy either. So, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to him. I got the impression when things got really heated, he seemed upset, angry, and perhaps even a bit embarrassed. And I wondered if he was that upset over that short conversation that perhaps he believes a little bit differently than his job allows him to say.
I think that's I feel like I can agree with you. I wasn't there, wasn't face to face, but I feel like we sort of joke amongst ourselves, that there's like 5 people at FDA that absolutely get it. They're just sort of stuck. Annie's story about your response to the Surgeon General's report, and I swear, I think by the end of the year, I'm going to get a panel of people together for one of our podcasts or Twitter spaces of folks who have just been blackballed by the tobacco control industry. And so we'll send you an invite for that, Annie.
Yeah.
But before I lose my train of thought, which too late, it's already gone. One of the things that stuck out to me it seemed like Kathy Hoke's response to you, Marc, was, you did a really good job of pointing out how you deal with customers and that, that relationship, it's a very personal relationship to begin with, right? Every time somebody comes in, it's, how much do you smoke? How long have you been smoking? What are your favorite flavors? And beyond it, I think that's sort of a natural start to getting to know the person. And
well, it has to be, including like, what do you do for a living? Because the truck driver who sits behind the wheel for 14 hours a day with nothing else to do needs a different solution than somebody who has a 5-minute cigarette break 3 times a day. Right? They can't use the same device and the same nicotine level. That truck driver wants to puff all day long, nonstop. So he wants something with a lower nicotine level that he can do that with. where somebody who has a 5-minute cigarette break, they may need a whole lot of nicotine in a few short puffs. So you have to learn a lot about who they are and what they do and what their day is like to give them the proper solution.
And so, yeah, I think maybe this is a good pivot for Annie to jump in. I don't know whether or not this is exactly your wheelhouse, but Kathy Hoke presented this as certainly humanizing the people that are working for the Maryland tobacco control centers, public health departments, but also it seemed like. It seems to me that this idea of getting to know people individually is a bit revolutionary. So my question is this a new revelation for tobacco control, or is this something that's been building for years?
So first I have to say, Marc killed it. I was in the room. I felt the energy change. I loved it, Marc. I know it's hard for me to speak and to know this was your first time going there. It was just so valuable what you said. And, you and I have talked before, your stories, actually everything you represented up there. And I could sense your frustration, which I think was important. You really represented the voices of so many consumers. So I'm not just saying that because we're talking together today. I hope that you know how important it was to hear you speak and also how you share your stories, because these relationships I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's essential. And so I'm going on there, but how can I answer this? So let me start by admitting my faults in this area and like the relationships and hearing people. So when I was in the ivory tower academia, like plugging along, I ran a study for nicotine patch, had over 100 people in that study. They came in for 6 hours each. I was looking how the patch interacts when you smoke a cigarette. So if you're wearing the patch, does it blunt the effects? Again, this is before e-cigs were on the market. And not one of those participants did I ever think to give a copy of the publication that came from that study. I never once, and some of it's IRB, I'm not supposed to have a personal relationship, but like that gap between a researcher or someone in academia, and I can't speak for government because I'm not there, but the same thing, and then the actual people that the reason we're getting this funding from NIH to study, they're not part of it. They have paywalls. They can't get to the articles. It's messed up. It's not isolated to tobacco. I'm working on it broader with substance use in general, but I will say outside of tobacco, I'm seeing more movement on this. So people with lived experience, having more of a voice, the Urban Survivors Union with engaging with researchers, and they've had a hard time. But for tobacco, I personally feel like from my viewpoint within academia, at least, like this is some sort of blind spot that researchers just aren't hearing or seeing the importance of not just lip service to the idea of engaging with people with lived experience, blah, blah, blah. Like, let's engage everyone in designing studies, in writing up the results, in writing up guidelines. Why aren't there consumers involved when we have national guidelines like the Surgeon General's report on e-cigarettes or other health products, or other products like that? Like this happens with other guidelines. And so I feel like it's not novel, and it's embarrassing that as humans we're not engaging like this. But I also have to admit my fault being in that ivory tower and isolated from the reality of people smoking, because I was raised in Eastern Kentucky. I grew up smoking, but it never clicked with me. So when I'm studying smoking in the 2000s, I'm not a smoker, yet I'm trying to help people smoking. So I'm sort of getting frustrated at myself, but I hope that answers your questions. I think, or your question, I heard a lot of that at e-cig summit, this idea of engagement and relationship building. And, I'm not seeing it in a lot of ways. I'm not seeing it with consumers. I'm not seeing it with maybe patients or people that actually want to stop smoking with a medication. I'm not seeing it with industry. There's just all these silos, and it's frustrating.
Well, I just want to say that my approach comes from my experience when I smoked. I tried a couple of like the health department, and go in and ask them for help. And, when you do something like that, they don't ask you anything, not even your name. They just start telling you this is what you have to do without knowing anything about you. And I remembered that. So basically, my approach is doing the exact opposite of what I experienced with tobacco control. And honestly, I think that's why it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and you may have already answered this question, and I neglected to include it in your introduction, Annie. But you do have this focus on removing barriers between the public and public health policy, and I assume science. So, in case there was anything more to add to that, what does that look like? Are there the mechanics you can describe of how to tear down those barriers? Is it just as simple as reaching out to affected populations, or what more do you think needs to happen to tear down these walls?
Well, I think honestly, people coming out of academia need to stop talking and listening. And I feel like until I started doing that, working for Penny, and having the chance to meet people and honestly just sort of letting go of the ego and trying to hear what was going on and not just from other scientists. So I think it's getting in uncomfortable conversations, but being respectful in it. And I'm not the best at it. I mean, I feel very frustrated at people I used to do research with and their tobacco harm reduction stance. But I mean, honestly, the best thing would be for me to keep engaging with them and talking. I would love it if I could be part of something structured to make that happen. But when I left Penny, I moved to an FDA, so CEDAR, not CTP, FDA public-private partnership. And what that is these exist through FDA. They're built to engage the public with FDA, with like NIH, other government, and with industry, whatever industry that is. The one I was focused on was chronic pain. So that involved sometimes pharma, sometimes manufacturers. And these things exist, right? And the reason they exist is because FDA found out years ago that things get slowed up and we need to be on the pulse. And so the work I was doing for this partnership, is called Action, was talking about, okay, how can we design research to better get at chronic pain? How can we do this faster? And it's just frustrating that we don't have something real like that. And it's not for people not trying. I've heard of historically things like the Marvin dialogues, and I apologize, I don't know of all of them, of efforts to sort of get everyone at the table in a real meaningful way, not just to look like it. And I assume it's been so hard with tobacco because of the history and consumers being treated disrespectfully in the messaging around tobacco harm reduction, just reducing a consumer to someone that just somehow was just tricked by big tobacco, or the nicotine hurt their brain so they can't make decisions. I get it. I study addiction. I'm at an addiction society, but I don't think that's helping us have this. So I have ideas of how we could do it, but I think I'm pretty idealistic. And I'm trying to be more of a connector now. That's why I love talking to you all. That started at Penny and Joe Gitchell supporting me and learning that. And then I've just tried to keep doing it. And I think that there's synergy and I've talked to Danielle about this with CASA, and there's other groups right now advocating for people with lived experience, say with maybe you're using heroin, but you don't want or need treatment, but you should still be part of the conversation. I think there's ways to get connection and grassroots around that. And I'd love to support that across with you all and other groups.
Well, speaking of Danielle, I know that she unmuted, so I'm gonna pitch it to you, Danielle.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Oh, by the way, hello Annie and hello Mark. Thanks so much for joining us. I was gonna mention, in terms of this sort of disconnect between researchers and the lack of communication between them and people who actually use these products. I'm sort of almost thinking, and Annie, you can correct me if this is you think this is off base, but to me, it almost seems like, researchers and potentially even physicians have a really hard time with smoking because it's not like other, things that they may come across or study or try to treat their patients with, right? Like you don't need to have diabetes in order to help your patient or a person get their diabetes under control, right? A lot of that is chemistry, medication, things like that. You don't necessarily need to have lived experience, cancer, for example, to treat cancer or study cancer. But when it comes to smoking, there are massive amount of highly complex psychological and social aspects that sort of go, way deeper than just the chemistry of what's going on. There's definitely chemistry and things that happen there, but the psychological and social aspects of smoking are not something that, you can take for granted, essentially. And so when Marc talks about, really getting to know people, his customers, before, recommending the best solution for them, I think that's a key part of it, because what they get out of smoking directly relates to what, type of vapor product or harm reduction product is going to be most helpful for them. Does that make sense?
For sure. And I hear you on that. And I don't want to cut you off, Marc, but I do want to add, like, I just helped build like a guideline on tobacco use in like addiction treatment settings, and talking with some clinicians about this, like it is like a wall, and there's some view of tobacco, like, and maybe it's disgust or something. They can't get on that level like Marc talks about and have that conversation. It's almost there's a barrier that I couldn't figure out why there.
I do
Well,
want to just one quick point while we're talking about this disconnect. I almost feel like we're going too easy on Summit Tobacco Control. Just like it's a pretty big disconnect where for a decade you've had millions of vapors trying to tell these people that they have quit smoking with vaping. Like it is something tangible. It's not like some hokey pokey people saying that some vitamin helps their anxiety or whatever. Like they can prove I quit smoking with vaping, yet barely anyone in tobacco control is still willing to admit that it's a viable tool for quitting publicly.
Yeah, it's gone beyond disconnect to the point they're trying to suppress us. They're ignoring us. They commission reports to give to Congress saying that we're bots. We're not even real people. They dismiss us on social media as trolls. They don't want to hear us. It's not a disconnect. It's gone way beyond that. But I wanted to back up. I wanted to note that there's yet another layer, and it goes to what Annie was saying, that a large number of, at least my clients, what I see in here, they're coming in with additional baggage, additional addictions, additional mental health issues. And those things often also have to be addressed to find a successful solution for them.
Yeah, actually, Matt doesn't know it, but he kind of set me up for this one. And going back to Annie, in your research, of course, with substance use, but also I would imagine underlying causes or root causes factor into this a lot. So I'm curious, have you come across people who are talking about nutrition as a way to prevent or treat things like depression, anxiety, and so on?
Not, I would say in like my little, the things I'm obsessed about related to this in science, not nutrition. And I don't know a lot about that body of work. I certainly see why it'd be important. I know more and study more right now, other like general comorbidities with smoking, and how it's, I guess the way I'm starting to look at it, it's very artificial, sort of what I did in my research, to just study relatively healthy, less younger than age 55 people that only smoke. That was my dissertation. I don't think that, I mean, there's a lot of people that fit that, but there's a lot of people that are older. They have, I'm not clear on nutritional stuff, but they have serious comorbidities, not necessarily related to tobacco. And like Marc was mentioning, addiction. And we sort of talk about people so in tobacco, so isolated. Oh no, they're just tobacco users or smokers or whatever, or vapors. But the truth is, more broadly in addiction, when we talk about someone with opioid use disorder, at least in my world, we more often talk about all these other things, the trauma, the other overlapping substances, which like 60 to 70% of the time is tobacco. So people seeking treatment for addiction, 60 to 70% are smokers. And so I know this doesn't get to your question, Alex, about nutrition, because I don't really have a good answer. So I definitely want to punt that to another speaker. But I just think that this, well, goes back to what Marc said, talking to people. There's such a complexity in each individual and in their goals and their needs. And also, like, what are they capable of if they're actively, trying, navigating methadone? They're still smoking. Well, if they don't want to quit, that's their choice. Then is there a way to educate them at least on safer alternatives? Maybe they never change their behavior. That isn't talked about a lot.
Yeah, I'm encouraged. I don't want to jump the gun on anything, but we did actually just recently launch a post on our website. It's part of an overall kind of effort to engage people with substance use disorder and mental health conditions, and really kind of it is about reaching out to those populations and seeing. Primarily, among our membership, we're looking for people who have switched to vaping and how that has been successful for them. And also, I think it's about exploring that relationship to nicotine and why people choose to use nicotine. And I think it's something that I don't know if we've gotten to the point of taking it for granted yet, but starting to look at nicotine as a way that people are self-medicating to manage symptoms that come along with everything from your retail anxiety to schizophrenia or other mental health conditions. And so I encourage people to check that. If you go to our website and just on the search bar, search mental health, that post should come up. And there's a way for our members to participate there. But I am very encouraged that at least I think there are people who are getting the ball rolling. I know Helen Redmond has done some work in this space. Or on this particular issue, reaching out to the people, unhoused people in New York, and people going to harm reduction centers as well. So some promising developments there. And I am at that point where I'm losing my train of thought. But Danielle is here to save the day.
One of the things that I was sort of thinking about what Annie was saying is that, so it seems like, there are researchers, particularly in, the drug use arena or substance use arena, that are, familiar with this sort of holistic approach to substance use, looking at other like comorbidities, other issues, things like that. And I'm just sort of wondering, why that seems so foreign to people in, tobacco control and tobacco research. Like, why is that holistic view completely lost? Does it have something to do with this sort of narrative that tobacco control has always put out there that, and Annie and I have talked about this before, that, people who smoke, the reason that they smoke is because they were, so stupid that they were duped by big tobacco companies. And so, only a certain type of person would be, susceptible to being tricked by big tobacco. And therefore, that's the problem, right? It's all just big tobacco issues. It's not potentially a symptom or a self-medicating, situation for other things going on in someone's life. It's strange to me that they can't, that nobody is thinking about that in terms of tobacco use.
And that's so horribly wrong. Because there are so many people that, I learn something new every day. I find out that one of my customers who's been coming in for years has Tourette's. And I expressed astonishment, and he said, well, this works. That's why you didn't know. I had no idea. And so many people talking about how they actually recognize themselves that they're self-medicating for stress and anxiety.
Yeah,
it's super important. It really is that people start to recognize this and address it.
Well, I'll add, so area I focused on when I was studying and why I actually started studying nicotine, it wasn't for smoking. I wanted to study nicotine because in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of literature coming out, right, that nicotine was a cognitive enhancer. pure nicotine. So they were looking at tablets, they were looking at gum. I studied the gum and never smokers. They were 18 years old. I gave them a bunch of gum. I made a placebo myself because I had no money, and I put Tabasco on it, and they hated it. But the whole goal of that work was to look at nicotine as an enhancer of cognition. Now, this is loaded, right? So there's a history with someone by the name of Warburton, who was doing cognition and nicotine research in the 80s and 90s, of an affiliation with tobacco. So it became sort of a tobacco playbook comment that nicotine enhances cognition. But the truth is, I also went on to my postdoc and did a meta-analysis on this, Heichman et al., and it does, like, the evidence shows. Now, there's more research on that, and I'd love to write about it, I just haven't had time, showing that there's certain people that might be more sensitive to those cognitive effects, which makes sense because in the research I did, where I gave it to a bunch of 18-year-olds that were freshmen at Wake Forest, they were all doing fine. I, excluded anyone that had any type of cognitive diagnosis. So it was sort of like, it wasn't boosting them in ways they needed. So that's just one example where I see that because of this affiliation with industry, there's actual science. Now, I'm not going around and claiming from my background researching it, like, everybody take nicotine, you're going to do so much better at work. Again, just like anything else, just like if you have ADHD and stimulants help you versus someone like me that doesn't have it and stimulants make me really nervous, it depends. And again, it's individualized. And this blanket statements and the fear around, for me to even write a commentary right now about cognition and saying nicotine benefits it, it would instantly be a red flag to people to look at my affiliations. And I know that it would be assumed that I'm saying that because it's suggesting there's benefits to nicotine, and nicotine is associated with industry. And sorry to keep going off on the industry thing, but it muddies a lot of this and sort of prevents the natural scientific dialogue, I think, about these things that Marc was mentioning, the benefits, the different physical and psychological states that we all come into the world with. And so certain drugs, certain stimuli, certain food alter our behavior in important ways. And this has been known forever. And why would nicotine be an exception? Just like other drugs have benefits and they have risks.
Yeah, I think industry is really the biggest thing, like you said, and it plays a part in so many factors in the vape world. And that's what really muddies the waters is you'll talk to say like progressives or something, and they'll talk about how horrible the drug war has been and so on and so forth. But then, they harp on the legalized drug sellers, and it's like, you can't have it both ways. Like, pick your poison. There's a lesser of two evils here. And so, that's industry is just what happens when you decriminalize a drug, and they have to accept that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the studies that and Annie, tell me if you know about this, is I'm interested to hear or see, results from the MIND study. That's, I think it's Dr. Paul Newhouse with Vanderbilt University, Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, NIH. That study to me is really interesting because they are in fact looking at nicotine for, mild cognitive impairment. And that obviously, to me, it seems like one of the most, examples of like a very pure, very clean, study that has like nothing to do with industry or anything like that, but really putting this, to the test. And that's one that I check their website probably like once a month, just trying to see if there's any updates or, what exactly is going on with that. Because I think that would lend a lot of credibility, to this. Like you said, I've read a lot of papers where, people are saying, yes, absolutely, nicotine has cognitive benefits. It has, enhanced cognition, different things. But then, like you said, there's also this, sort of snap reaction from some people that's, no, that's just a big tobacco lie from, the 80s or something. And so that's one I'm really interested in.
Yeah, and Newhouse's work is super cool, and that is how I got into this. So I was actually my first year of grad school studying cognitive aging, and then I saw that connection, right? So Alzheimer's, nicotine, and then I never worked with older adults in nicotine, but I think it's really valuable work. And on this note, and sort of taking it back to eSig Summit, I did submit a question through the app. That was cool how you could do that. But it turns out I probably should have stood up and asked it to Benowitz, because in his presentation at the beginning, he noted nicotine is likely, damages or harms, developing brains and can cause, and I'm misquoting him, it's on his slides, but basically this idea that it's likely that nicotine has these negative cognitive effects. But then on a later slide, he did note that nicotine could be a cognitive enhancer. And that, I get it, right? Like developing brains are different than adult brains. But that isn't a distinction that's talked about. And that's one reason I really went hard at the Surgeon General's report, because if you look at my criticism, the problem was how they found the evidence. It was certainly biased, even if they won't agree with me. But the evidence they used to suggest nicotine damages the brain, there were some strong statements in there. They weren't from nicotine. They were smoking studies. There is evidence suggesting otherwise. They didn't cite my meta-analysis. And I feel like we can't even have an honest conversation about something like that. And that, that dichotomy, certainly any psychoactive substance that a pregnant woman ingests, it could be maybe not a drug, but something else that alters development. I mean, there is that risk similar to caffeine. There's going to be risk if you drink caffeine and are pregnant, but it's almost like that animal research in nicotine, it's just been exploded into messaging that's coming out that nicotine damages the brain, to the point where it's erasing all these decades of work on nicotine being an enhancer. And I feel like I'm stealing the show from Marc and Matt, so I won't keep going on about this cognitive thing, but maybe you all can have something in the future and I can dig into all the cognitive stuff. But it's very frustrating to watch, as I've been part of that literature for many years.
Don't worry about me. I'm just a regular here that just pipes up once in a while.
Okay.
Matt's our additional color man. So thank you. But I will think, bringing it back to E6 Summit and talking about this honest conversation that we all hope we will have one day. One of the themes that I feel like I heard it in the conference, but also outside of the conference, was FDA communication. Throw the CDC in there too. And I think Kathleen Crosby had an opportunity to respond to that. Matt Holman did his level best to, recite policy back to us. Were either of you, Marc or Annie, satisfied with their responses, and what could they be doing to make it better?
Myself, absolutely not, and quit lying, period. They're not telling the truth. Kathy Crosby actually stood up there and said our public message is misinformation. We only tell the truth when an individual asks us a specific question. That is unacceptable, full stop. Unacceptable.
Yeah, I wrote down a quote. I believe it was her, that she said, we have to follow the science. And this is, it's just a frustrating thing, because like Ray Naira presented, it's humans do scientific research. Humans are prone to bias. And that's not just how they design the study. It's how they interpret it, how they frame it, how they spin it, they report it. It's the journals that choose to publish it, and alternatively, journals that choose to not publish other studies. And so I like the idea of follow the science. When I was 20 in college looking to go to grad school, I would probably wear a shirt with that on it. But it's just, it's honestly, it's not really critical thought. And science is not simple. And like some of the messaging they were talking about, they know where kids are at. They're really hyper focused on mental health. And so that's where they're going with their messaging. And someone asked directly, I apologize for not knowing who it was, but what's the cost if we choose to scare children and use these harm focused messages that are overstated or false? What is the cost? And I never felt like there was a good answer there. I never felt a sense of that being heard. And it honestly feels like what I sense a lot in tobacco research field. It's just like a lot of I'm a scientist, this is evidence-based, and it's beyond tobacco. It's a problem with science right now that we can all throw that out there and we can all say, it's a meta-analysis. It's the top type of evidence. Well, we already know you can manipulate a meta-analysis to get what you want. We saw this with Glantz, and that the type of studies he put into it were flawed. And not to just pick on him, it happens across both sides. So I did not feel reassured, and I do feel that Matt has constraints on him. I got that sense. I have no affiliation with FDA now or any type of knowledge. And honestly, I should know more about policy. You all are on the pulse of that. And I feel like going to eSig Summit got me caught up a lot, because I'm really just looking at evidence a lot and studies and not really following that. But I was disappointed that there wasn't more like honesty about the messaging that clearly is flawed.
Speaking of honesty, and I mentioned the CDC earlier. Annie, in particular, I'm curious on if you have a take you're willing to share about Brian King taking over at CTP.
Oh man, I don't know him, and I wrote the critique of the Surgeon General's report. I will say this: I wanted to write about this, and so I stood up at SRNT in Florence, Italy. It was 2016. It was a panel talking about the e-cigarette report. It had just come out, and they kept talking about how evidence-based it was, and I've forgotten now, like, randomized controlled trial, this and all this, and I stood up and my knees were knocking. I was so nervous because, I was working for Penny at that time, my PhD advisors in the room, all these people that I'd studied with, and, I had already sort of gotten that sense. So I'm the industry shill. But what I had to say was, in the methods of the Surgeon General's report, I got up and said it. And I said, it says, we added evidence after the year 2016 when it met, and I am going to get the quote wrong, you all can look it up, but preconceived ideas. I mean, it's like basically saying, we biased this report. And I said it straight to Brian King. And his answer was really knee-jerk, and it said, well, we paid contractors to do this. And he said some other stuff that was like not reassuring at all. And, I sat down and it was just not reassured by his answer. That's the only time I've ever talked to him. It was in public. My knees were knocking. And then I went home and I wrote the critique because I thought, this is crazy. And so I will say, his response, if you read it, the first line refers to me as working for industry. Everything else in their response doubles down on how high of a quality that report was. And as someone that writes systematic reviews and written guidelines and is involved in health technology assessment reports, like, it wasn't. And it was time to have a real dialogue, and he did not. And that's very disappointing. And the fact that he's heading up CTP now it's so disappointing to me for that reason. I know for other people it means a variety of things, but on a personal level, I would hope it'd be someone that's more engaged in the scientific process. And we're all fallible. I am certain there are papers out there that I would, if someone challenged me on, I'm like, yes, I should have said this or that. And that was not part of the dialogue at all. And the only dialogue was that I was an industry shill. And that's why I left Penny. I needed more of a voice. And so here I am 3.5 years later. And I certainly hope I could write something at some point to describe what I just told you all.
Yeah, and hopefully, I assume that you're still writing for Filter. Hopefully that's a good outlet. And certainly we are definitely going to have you back on one of our programs. This has been a really good conversation, and I appreciate your point of view in all of this. A lot of what you're sort of working on here, I think maybe from the fringes, without the real support that folks need in getting information out there, keeping it accessible. Is there a way to kind of, I feel like I should know the answer to this. There are people who run journals that don't keep stuff, stuffed behind a paywall. But what do you envision, changing in making all of this research not only accessible from here you can go access it on the internet standpoint, but understandable so that the people who really need this information can digest it?
Yeah, there's got to be funding and like a structure to it, because I could get a blog right now, and I thought about that and just do my thing. I had this thing I thought I would develop called Science Snapshot, and I'd just develop it. I'd analyze an article and share it with you all, and everybody knows listening, right? There's so much evidence coming in so fast, and then I'm biased, right? So I'm harm reduction focused. I grew up with smokers. I have, this experience with industry and with being like, ostracized. So all that would seep into those summaries. So I think it needs to be a structured approach. It needs to be a trusted source and funded. But the challenge is, right, we have a group different organizations. We have one called Truth. And it's like, we're not feeling trustful or truth, like that's truthful. So it's sort of like, how do you get that endorsement? And I actually, to give it back to Marc, I think there's ways to do it in mass and to summarize things. And of course, you all are doing that, and I really appreciate the efforts you all are doing. But Marc, like having conversations like this, and Marc talking with individuals, it takes time, but it's real. And when Marc tells his story, and how amazing it felt when he switched to a vape device so quickly. I mean, that is profound. And there's no way to convey that in, a brief summary for CDC in the way, like, I'll speak for myself. When he told me, I finally understood the relief, the energy that gives people, that empowerment, that no, I'm not defeated by this thing I've been, if you've been trying to stop. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I mean, right now I don't have an answer to that. I do hope that more of it can come like this in discussion and just trust built, not manufactured and forced on us from the, hierarchy of academia and government.
Yeah, well, you're in the right place. I know that especially the vapor industry is accustomed to building the airplane in the air. And so definitely among friends here. And Marc, I saw you unmuted there. Did you want to jump in?
No, I actually hit it by accident. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I know, Annie, you have a hard stop at 8:00, so we're going to let you get back part of your Wednesday here. And I'll start by thanking the guests, but of course, any burning issues, anything we maybe didn't pay enough attention to with regard to E-Cig Summit. Any final thoughts from you guys?
Well, I just want to add a big focus of mine is focusing our lens more on older adults and middle-aged adults, and shifting the balance more equal across the age spectrum. And the youth focus it's getting a little extreme, a lot extreme.
I agree with that. My clientele, excuse me, my clientele is getting older and older, my average age here. So that is what I'm focusing on, the older folks. Also, just to throw in there, I'm also seeing, Annie was talking about doing a cognitive study, and using people who were perfectly healthy, whatever. I'm seeing older people benefiting from nicotine use, and people with issues, probably because they have them. That's where we need to be looking at that, the benefits of nicotine, or for the people who need them. Because I'm seeing it here. I know it's anecdotal, but it's pretty obvious as well. Both for clarity of thought, focus, for memory for older folks. I have a couple people who they're vaping to quit smoking, but they're older folks. And I noticed that they shook a lot and brought it up and mentioned, there's studies showing that nicotine can help with fine motor skills. And sure enough, upping their nicotine level helped them with their shaking issues. It's that simple. It
makes sense.
It does, kind of after the fact. It takes a while to recognize these things, even for me, even when it's right in front of my face. But I also wanted to say my takeaway and I mentioned it earlier, it's the first time I've ever been to one of these. I would recommend one of these conferences for anybody in the industry, anybody, any consumer. It was amazing all the way around. I got a lot out of it besides standing up there absolutely terrified talking to everybody.
You were awesome.
Yeah, it didn't feel so awesome. That's the most scared I've been in my entire life.
Oh, it didn't show.
You did an excellent job, Marc. I'm with you. I've been doing public speaking for a while now, and I always get off of stage or out of a presentation, and I have that immediate thought of, I have no idea what I just said.
Yeah.
I hope I still have a job in 15 minutes. And speaking of which, I believe I may or may not still be on a panel towards the end of the year and talking about the forgotten smoker. So I will certainly, be referencing your work, Annie, and your. I know you had the Filter an article about your neighbor in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And of course, touch back on this episode for reference. So with that, all of that having been said, again, thank you guys, Marc Slis, Annie Kleykamp, for joining us tonight on CASA's Twitter Spaces Live. For anybody who is joining late, maybe wants to go back and listen to the whole thing, or you just didn't catch everything the first time through, early next week, we will have this posted up on our SoundCloud. I think that's how long it takes to get the data back from Twitter. In the meantime, if again you want to look around and see what CASA has to offer, go visit casaa.org. We've got over 13,000 testimonials. We've got lots of opinions and feelings and ways that you can get absolutely involved in all of this. Also, while you're there, visit our store. I think it's under the resources tab, and pick up a t-shirt. It's not a huge money maker for us, but the real important thing is, number one, they look good. And number two, get the message out there far and wide. Give it as a gift, keep it for yourself, do what you will, but put it on a t-shirt and wear it around town. I am fairly confident I'm missing out some other things here. Follow us on Twitter, of course, at CASA Media. We're CASA Media across all of the social medias, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And of course, join CASA. It's absolutely free. We're rarely, if ever, going to hit you up for money. We really just want your engagement, and we want to hear your voices pushing back against all of these horrible policies, and the off chance that we do actually get to support something. It's really important that we show up in force, because these policies are about us and they shouldn't be made without us. And with that, unless I've forgotten any of the other closing points, I think we'll call that a night.